Hello everyone, this is Remleiz from 40k Theories.
And this is Naerina.
And welcome to this new episode of 40k Lore for Newcomers. For this episode, we will be taking a brief look at none other than the Emperor of Mankind. As always, this is a brief overview, and certain events and such will have in-depth videos dedicated to them within the future. So without further ado, let's begin.
We are one with the Emperor. Our souls are joined at his will.
The Emperor of Mankind, as his title suggests, is the sovereign ruler of all humanity. He is the pinnacle of humanity's psychic evolution, being the single most powerful psyker to have ever existed within the human species, as well as being a perpetual, a being that is, for all intents and purposes, immortal. When he walked among mankind, the Emperor was not only a highly charismatic politician, but he was also a skilled warrior and a great general, often leading his forces from the front lines at the head of a host of golden-clad warriors known as the Custodes, his personal bodyguards. Such was his power and charisma that despite his objections and his rejection of theology, many people of his newly formed Imperium began to worship the Emperor as a god incarnate, and following the closing hours of the HORUS heresy, the Emperor would effectively martyr himself to defeat the arch-traitor Horus Lupercal. This belief in the Emperor's divinity would eventually blossom into a fully fledged state religion known as the Imperial Cult, with the Emperor now fully accepted by the Imperium at large as the god of humanity.
There is only the Emperor, and he is our shield and protector.
The stories detailing the events that would lead to the creation of the Emperor of Mankind are numerous and often contradictory. But the most commonly accepted version of events lies with a group of ancient Terran psykers known as the Shamans. The Shamans were the first psykers to have evolved within the human race, having done so during either the Stone Age or early Bronze Age, when human societies were still largely comprised of primitive hunter-gatherers. Over the course of several generations, the Shamans began to slowly lose their ability to manipulate the energies of the warp. This was due in part to the gestation of malevolent warp entities taking form within the Sea of Souls, beings who would eventually awaken and become known to mortals as the Chaos Gods. These beings would also begin to devour the souls of the dead to sate their hunger, preventing souls from reincarnating into new bodies as they had done in the past. The Shamans began to realize that these Chaos Gods would become the greatest threat to their entire race, and they sought to create a being that could counteract the ruinous powers, which they would call the New Man. The Shamans would conduct a mass ritualistic suicide and use their immense powers to merge their souls into a singular entity. The mortal vessel that would bear this Gestalt soul within it would be born many centuries later during 8000 BC, within a small fishing village along the banks of the Sakaya River, in the land that would become known one day as Turkey. It was this boy that would one day rise to become the Emperor of Mankind. When the Emperor was still a young child, his father was murdered by his uncle. It was during the preparation of his father's funeral that the Emperor's own psychic abilities would begin to awaken. His mind's eye saw his uncle kill his father, and it was this moment that the Emperor decided that humanity needed to be guided by a singular ruler and brought under the yoke of law and order. The Emperor would calmly approach his uncle and use his powers to send him into cardiac arrest, killing him as a result. The Emperor did not do this out of spite or malice, but out of a cold, logical necessity. his uncle had committed a crime, and thus needed to be punished. It was then that the Emperor would leave his home and begin the life of a wandering nomad. During this life of roaming ancient Terra, the Emperor began to subtly guide humanity's path, and ancient figures from Terran mythology, such as Jesus or Buddha, are thought to have been representations of the Emperor at some point in time. Between the 11th and 12th century AD, the Emperor would fight against a being which would become known millennia later as the Dragon of Mars, which itself is an entity thought to be the Catan known as the Void Dragon. Clad in the golden armour of a knight and riding a mighty black horse, the Emperor would eventually defeat the dragon, thrusting his sword into a spot between the dragon's scales beneath its wing, and having the beast bound with the tattered remains of his personal banner in order to subdue it, giving rise to the legend of St. George and the Dragon in the process. However, despite his own power, the Emperor could not destroy the dragon. The dragon would remain imprisoned until eventually it would be transported to the world of Mars many centuries later and imprisoned within the Noctis Labyrinth. During the Dark Age of technology, the Emperor would travel to the world of Molech accompanied by a woman named Olivia Soraka, who like the Emperor was herself a perpetual. It was here on Molech that the Emperor discovered a Chaos Gate, a portal into the realm of chaos itself. The Emperor stepped through the portal and would gain a substantial boost to his already incredible powers, as well as newfound knowledge which would eventually be used to undertake the beginnings of the Primarch project. At an undetermined point in Terra's history, the Emperor would discover a piece of ancient Eldari technology within a set of ancient ruins deep within the deserts of Asia. This piece of technology would eventually become simply known as the Golden Throne. Despite its name, the Golden Throne was not simply an ornate throne to be sat upon, but was in fact a doorway into the Webway, a subspace network that was created by the ancient race known as the Old Ones. It was soon after discovering this technology that the Emperor began to make plans for his Webway project, so that humanity could traverse the stars without the need to utilize warp travel, which was extremely dangerous and highly unpredictable by comparison. In addition to this, the Emperor sought to sever humanity from the warp entirely, in order to not only allow humanity to evolve into a form that the Eldari could only dream of, but also to free humanity from the taint of chaos completely, a fact that would not go unnoticed by the ruinous powers.
No world shall be beyond my rule. No enemy shall be beyond my wrath.
After the Dark Age of technology, the Chaos God Slanesh began to take form within the warp, thanks in part to the hedonistic actions of the ancient Eldari Empire. This resulted in a mass appearance of psychers upon almost every world colonized by humanity within the galaxy, as well as thousands of warp storms being created, which in turn resulted in separating many of these colonies from one another, and rendering warp travel impossible. Terra, now isolated from all other worlds outside of the Sol system, began to suffer a complete and total breakdown of civilization and government. Tribes and warbands of techno-barbarians began to appear, battling each other for territory, technology, and dominance. This time in humanity's history became known as the Age of Strife. The Emperor himself would rise at this time as one of these many warlords, and would reveal himself fully at last. Within secret laboratories, the Emperor had created the first of his gene-forged warriors to lead into battle during the Age of Strife. They were known as the Thunder Warriors, who were larger and stronger than the later Space Marines, but they also suffered from physical and mental instability in contrast to the Astartes. During this time, the Emperor would meet the man who would become his closest friend and confidant, Malcador the Sigillite. It was Malcador who convinced the Emperor to take the title of Emperor, as he would lead his Thunder Warriors and other warriors loyal to him in his war to unify Terra under his rule. The Emperor would begin to conquer the various regions of Terra, and the leaders of those whom the Emperor conquered were destined to forfeit their firstborn sons, who would in time become the recruitment pool for the Legio Custodes. During the Wars of Unification, the Emperor would briefly meet the human psyker known as John Grammaticus during a victory ceremony after defeating the forces of the Pan-Pacific Empire. Grammaticus was an officer in a military force called the Caucasian Levies, and the Emperor offered to speak to Grammaticus in private at a future point in time to discuss options available to, as the Emperor would say, beings like us. He would never get the chance, however, as Grammaticus was killed during the battle for Anatole Hive. What the Emperor did not know, however, is that Grammaticus would be resurrected by the Eldari autarch Slaudar, turning the human into a perpetual, now in service to the Xenos organization, the Cabal. At this time, the Emperor also began to spread what he would call the Imperial Truth. The Imperial Truth spread the truth of science, logic, and reason to replace the ancient and primitive superstitions of religion. Every place of worship upon Terra would be torn down and destroyed, culminating with the destruction of the Church of the Lightning Stone, following the Emperor's debate with its resident holy man, Uriah Olither. Near the end of this crusade, the Thunder Warriors would learn of their planned obsolescence and that their short lifespan was engineered deliberately by the Emperor. Enraged, they turned against him. The Legio Custodes would butcher these now obsolete warriors, though a few of these Thunder Warriors would escape, fleeing either to other worlds or to deep within the hive cities of Terra itself, leaving the lives of criminals or pit fighters in order to simply survive. The Emperor would then begin to plan for what would be known as the Great Crusade, to bring all the humanity's lost colonies under his rule to form the Imperium of Man. These preparations included the creation of astropaths, psychers who are capable of transmitting messages across space, thanks to having a sliver of the Emperor's own power imbued within them through an event known as soul-binding. The Emperor would also begin construction of the Astronomicon, which itself would be a great psychic beacon akin to a lighthouse in a storm. The Emperor also realized that he would need generals to help him undertake this great crusade, and utilizing the knowledge he gleaned from the Chaos Gate upon Molech, he began the Primarch Project. The Primarch Project involved the Emperor effectively creating 20 sons that would be doned from his own genetic material, each infused with a significant portion of his own godlike power. These sons were grown within accelerated gene culturing chambers under the supervision of the Emperor himself. Each of these Primarchs would become a demigod, strong and proud and massive in stature, blessed with keen intellect, charisma, the strength to turn rock and metal into dust, and even the ability to tap into the energies of the warp itself. However, the capsules containing the infant Primarchs were spirited away due to the opening of a warp rift, which resulted in each of the Primarchs landing upon different worlds throughout the galaxy, where they would, with a few exceptions such as Konrad Kurtz, be adopted and raised by human parents. Despite this, the Primarch Project had still yielded fruit. The genetic makeup would be used to create the Legiones Astartes, the Space Marines of the first founding legions. Each of these warriors would be gifted a portion of their gene sire's own traits, as well as near superhuman levels of strength and resilience. The Emperor would then lead his Space Marine legions to reclaim the Sol system. The first world the Emperor would visit would be Mars, which was now home to the Martian Mechanicum, great engineers and scientists devoted to the worship of the Machine God. A peace treaty would be formed between the Imperium and the Mechanicum, for both factions needed the other to spread past the Sol system. The Mechanicum had access to long-forgotten technologies, while the Emperor could give them in return access to navigators, a species of abhuman that could see the tides of warp space, allowing ships to sail through the immaterium with greater precision. This treaty was known as the Treaty of Olympus.
The universe has many horrors yet to throw at us. This is not the end of our struggle. This is only the beginning of our crusade to save humanity. Be faithful, be strong, be vigilant.
The Emperor's Space Marine legions would begin conquering the worlds of the Sol system, driving out Xenos populations that had taken root upon the moons of Saturn and Jupiter. It was not long after this that Slaanesh was finally born, ripping a hole within the fabric of reality, creating a warp rift that would become known as the Eye of Terror. This resulted in the destruction of the Eldari Empire, but also caused the warp storms throughout the galaxy to cease, which allowed the Emperor and his legions to finally begin the Great Crusade. Over the course of the Great Crusade, the Emperor would begin to be reunited with each of his lost sons. The first of the Primarchs he would rediscover would be Horus Lupercal upon the world of Chthoniya, which was in a planetary system relatively close to the Sol system. Horus was still a child when he was reunited with his father, and as he grew into a man, he was raised by the Emperor himself, with the two becoming incredibly close. The Emperor would gift Horus the Lunar Wolves Legion, those Astartes made from Horus's own genetic template, to command. Horus would remain the only Primarch at the Emperor's side for 30 years, until the Emperor was reunited with another of his sons upon the world of Fenris, Leman Russ of the Space Wolves Legion. When the Emperor was reunited with each of the Primarchs, some, such as Rabute Gilliman, swore fealty immediately. Others, such as Vulcan or Russ, challenged the Emperor to a series of challenges, such as who could forge the best weapon or win in a duel. But one by one, each Primarch would swear allegiance to him, even if only begrudgingly in some cases. Prior to being reunited with the last of his sons, Alpharius Omegon of the Alpha Legion, the Emperor punished two of his sons, those of the 2nd and 11th Legions, for an unknown transgression, and had their names and deeds stripped from all Imperial records. Their statues that were erected within the Imperial Palace would be torn down and destroyed. The nature of the crimes these two lost Primarchs committed and their ultimate fates are unknown, though it is presumed that they were either banished or executed as punishment. 200 years after the Great Crusade began, following the success of the Ullanor Crusade, the Emperor decided to return to Terra. Here, the Emperor would begin to expand the bureaucratic elements of Imperial government by founding the Council of Terra, the precursor to the modern-day High Lords of Terra, as well as setting up the Imperial tithing system to acquire more resources and manpower from the worlds that had been conquered by the Emperor's forces. In his absence, the Emperor would name the Primarch Horus as War Master, granting him command of the Emperor's armies in his absence. At some unknown point in time, various cults began to appear throughout the Imperium dedicated to worshipping the Emperor as a god incarnate. The Emperor despised being referred to as a god, and loathed the fact that people would put their faith into what he perceived to be primitive superstitions. The Emperor would become angered at his son Lorgar of the Wordbearers Legion for not only their tardiness in regards to rendering worlds compliant, but also remaining behind on these worlds to erect temples and churches dedicated to the worship of the Emperor. To punish Lorgar and his legion, the Emperor ordered the Ultramarines Legion to utterly destroy the city of Manatee upon the world of Kur, which had begun openly worshipping the Emperor as a god, and the word-bearers as his angels. Lorgar and his legion would be publicly shamed within the ashes of the city by the Emperor, Malcador, who is now the regent of Terra, and Lorgar's brother, the Primarch Rabute Guilliman of the Ultramarines Legion. Little did the Emperor know that this would sow the seeds of the Horus heresy. A few decades after the Judgment of Monarchia, the Emperor would preside over an event called the Council of Nicaea, or as it was more informally known, the Trial of Magnus the Red. Magnus the Red, the Primarch of the Thousand Suns Legion, had continued to study and experiment with sorcery and warp energy despite the Emperor's warnings. This in turn led to a debate whether the Space Marine legions should continue utilizing the Librarius, an element within each legion, to train up psychically sensitive battle brothers into specialized psychic warriors known as Librarians. Magnus the Red, as well as many other Primarchs and Legion representatives, argued their case for and against using psychers within their legions. But ultimately, the Emperor decreed that the legions were to cease utilizing psychers with the exception of astropaths and navigators, and that all librarians would return to being rank and file battle brothers, forbidden to utilize their abilities. The rank of chaplain within the legions was created to make sure the Emperor's edict was adhered to. This became known as the Edict of Nicaea. The Emperor would then return to Terra to undertake his Webway project in secret from his sons.
Praise the Emperor, whose sacrifice is life, as ours is death.
Thanks in part to the Emperor's actions in reprimanding Lorgar for his religious fanaticism, War Master Horus Lupercal would fall under the sway of the Chaos Guards. The Chaos Guards informed Horus that the Emperor abandoned the Great Crusade in order to become a fully fledged god, and that once the Great Crusade was complete, the Emperor would have the Primarchs and the Space Marine legions culled from existence, much like he did to his Thunder Warriors centuries prior. Horus would conspire with his brothers Fulgrim, Mortarion, Lorgar, and Angron and begin planning the initial conflicts of the Horus heresy. Magnus the Red tried to use his powers to persuade Horus to not go through with his rebellion, but Horus would not be dissuaded. Magnus then attempted to warn the Emperor about Horus's treachery, and due to how slow and unreliable astropathic messages can be, instead used his sorcery to send an astral projection of himself to warn his father directly. Little did Magnus realize that he would inadvertently make a bargain with the Chaos Guard Zinj in order to breach a webway corridor that was blocking him from reaching the Emperor. This act resulted in a warp tear upon Terra itself, which allowed demons to swarm into the man-made portions of the webway through the breach. The Emperor was furious. Not only did Magnus break the Emperor's edict by utilizing sorcery, but he also caused irreparable damage and malfunctions to centuries of work upon the Golden Throne and the Greater Webway project. The Emperor refused to listen to any attempt of a warning Magnus had risked to bring him and sent an order to the Primarch Leman Russ and the Space Wolves Legion to bring Magnus the Red to Terra in order to stand trial. However, Horus, who was now corrupted by the powers of chaos, intercepted the message and ordered Leman Russ to instead kill Magnus the Red and destroy his Thousand Suns Legion. Russ, being unaware of Horus's treachery, obeyed, and this led to an act known as the Burning of Prospero. When word of Horus's treachery reached the Emperor, thanks in part to the loyalist Death Guard Captain Nathaniel Garrow, the Emperor issued an order to recall those Primarchs and legions still loyal to him to Terra. Rugal Dawn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists Legion, would be made War Master in all but name, and would begin the fortification process to prepare for the traitors' eventual assault upon Terra. The Emperor would mainly be focused upon stabilizing and repairing the Webway project, his custodians and the warp-nullifying presence of the Sisters of Silence keeping the demonic entities at bay, while the Emperor was trapped into using his incredible psychic might to prevent Terra from being engulfed by the warp rift. This effort began to put immense strain upon the Emperor, both physically and psychically, causing the Emperor severe pain and causing him to bleed from his orifices over the course of the next 5 years. Following the events of the Eastvarn 5 drop site massacre, where the Salamanders, Raven Guard, and the Iron Hands Legion suffered devastating losses at the hands of those legions who sided with HORUS, Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard, returned to Terra in order to ask the Emperor for aid in rebuilding his legion. The Emperor would take possession of his regent, Malkador the Sigillite, in order to speak to his son. The Emperor would then grant Corax access to the laboratories hidden deep within the Himalayan mountains, which contained the necessary data as well as pure Primarch genetic material, which allowed Corax to rebuild his legion, beginning the Raven Guard's Raptor project. Demonic incursions within the webway would begin to increase as the Legio Custodes and the Sisters of Silence, along with the entire Titan Legion from the Martian Mechanicum, would struggle to keep them at bay. Things began to grow dire for the Imperial forces within the webway, thanks to the arrival of the demon Draknien, a demon created from the act of humanity's very first murder. Draknien's presence caused the demons to attack with renewed vigor, and the Emperor knew that he needed to make his presence known upon the battlefield in order to aid his forces. To this end, he ordered that over 1,000 Psykers have their souls sacrificed in order to power the Golden Throne for but a single day. This would give the Emperor enough time to confront Draknien and help reinforce the beleaguered Imperial forces fighting against the demonic horde. Draknien and his hordes would devastate the Custodians until the Emperor himself entered the fray, using his powers to turn the tide against the demons in a conflagration of light and flame. Draknien and the Emperor would clash, and the Emperor came close to being slain by the demon before he managed to bind Draknien into the body of the custodian Ra Endymion, ordering him to flee to the depths of the webway to keep the demonic horde away from Terra. The Emperor would weep for the fact that his webway project had failed humanity, and now the Emperor would seemingly be forever trapped upon the Golden Throne in order to keep the warp tear from enveloping Terra. Not only that, but the Emperor confessed to Shield Captain Diocletian that the Imperium itself would be ultimately doomed to destruction, though he did not know whether it would occur within a year, 10,000 years, or even later. He only knew that his dream was dead. The Emperor was, for once, at a loss over what course of action he should undertake. It was not long after this that the final battle in the HORUS heresy would begin, the siege of Terra itself.
I was there. I was there when HORUS slew the Emperor.
The Emperor would leave the defense of the Imperial Palace in the hands of his sons Rogol Dawn, Sanguinius, and Jagatai Khan to keep the traitor forces at bay for as long as possible, while the Emperor continued with his attempts to prevent the warp tear within the Imperial webway from enveloping Terra, utilizing the power of the Golden Throne to aid him in this regard. Horus's forces would breach the walls of the Imperial Palace and swarm like a plague, as the remaining loyalists fought back desperately to try and hold out for reinforcement. It was not long after traitor forces began to reach the Eternity Gate within the palace that Horus would lower the shields on his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Some believe Horus did this out of arrogance, wishing to watch his father fall in battle. Others believe that this was due to the fact that the loyalist forces of the Ultramarines, Space Wolves, and Dark Angels legions would soon arrive within the Sol system, and seeking to end the conflict before they could turn the tide against him, Horus challenged the Emperor to come and face him in single combat, winner take all. Whatever the true reason, the Emperor, along with the Primarchs Sanguinius and Rogel Dawn, along with dozens of Space Marine Terminators, warriors of the Legio Custodes, and even a few members of the Imperial Army, would teleport themselves aboard Horus's ship, against Dawn's wishes. In the Emperor's absence, Jagatai Khan would command the remaining loyalists in battle, while Malkador the Sigillite would remain upon the Golden Throne in a desperate attempt to contain its immense energies using his own considerable psychic capability. When the Emperor materialized upon the vengeful spirit, he and his sons would be scattered throughout the ship. The Emperor witnessed the corruption that had taken hold upon Horus's vessel and was disgusted by it. The Emperor and his forces would battle their way through hordes of traitorous Astartes and demonic creatures as they sought to reach the command deck. When the Emperor finally reached the bridge, he witnessed Horus standing triumphant over the broken and lifeless body of Sanguinius, who had found the War Master first. Horus mocked his father, claiming that he, and not the Emperor, was the true ruler of all of humanity. The Emperor was wrought with grief and sorrow, appalled by what his most favoured son had become. The Emperor declared that he pitied Horus for becoming a pawn of the ruinous powers, not its master, as Horus himself believed. Horus would then launch himself at the Emperor. Father and son battled one another in a desperate bid for the future of humanity. Despite his own immense power, the Emperor had found Horus had also been augmented by the power of the Chaos Gods. The Emperor initially had the upper hand, but found himself unable to strike down Horus. His paternal instincts, however, would prove to be his undoing. Horus had no such doubts in his mind, and would use his power, both physical and psychic, to rip out one of the Emperor's eyes, tear his arm from its socket, crush his windpipe, as well as inflict numerous other injuries, before Horus raised the Emperor high above him and snapped his father's spine over his knee with a sickening crack. As Horus prepared to slay his father, a lone figure entered the room. Some claim that this was a simple soldier of the Imperial Army named Alanius Pius, while others say it was a Space Marine or a Custodian. Whoever this man was, he charged fearlessly at Horus, before the War Master vaporized him with his psychic powers, reveling in the kill. It was this moment that forced the Emperor to accept just how far his son had fallen, and how irredeemable he now was. The Emperor would unleash a blast of psychic energy so powerful through the War Master's heart that the powers of chaos were driven from his body. Horus, in a moment of clarity, would beg his father to finish him before the madness took hold once more, and the Emperor complied, striking the killing blow. Not only was Horus slain, but his very soul was utterly destroyed. The Emperor would then collapse as Rogel Dawn finally made his way to the bridge. With the last of his strength, the Emperor instructed Dawn to take him back to TERRA and place him upon the Golden Throne. The traitor forces began to panic and flee at the news of Horus's death, and the Loyalists would drive the traitors away from TERRA. The Emperor's forces had won, though it was a Pyrrhic victory. When Rogel Dawn brought his father to the Golden Throne, Malkador had perished, the immense energies of its mechanism too much of a strain upon his ancient frame. The Emperor would be interred into the Golden Throne, where he would remain, silent and stoic. His armour would be broken down and given to each of the 9 Loyalist legions, where each piece would be melted down and used in the creation of the Crux Terminatus, used by Space Marine Terminators. Ever since he ascended to the Golden Throne, the Emperor no longer actively governed his Imperium, his will being carried out by the High Lords of Terra who rule in his name. The many cults celebrating his divinity would grow in size and popularity, until the cult of the Emperor would become a fully fledged state religion practiced by the common people of the Imperium, and his martyrdom against the arch-traitor would be remembered forevermore. His very will would continue to keep the warp rift on Terra from enveloping it for millennia to come, and his mind would focus the beacon of the Astronomicon to allow ships to navigate the dark tides of warp space. None save for a select few would even be granted an audience with their lord and master. 10,000 years later, the Emperor's son Rabute Guilliman would return, and he and his father would speak for several days and nights within the throne room upon Holy Terra, before Guilliman would emerge and take his place as Lord Commander of the Imperium, with his father's sword as his symbol of office. And that concludes this edition of 40k Lore for Newcomers.
If you liked this video, consider supporting us on Patreon for more content.
Until next time, this has been Remleiz from 40k Theories,
And this has been Naerina.
and we'll see you soon.